Welcome, gentlemen and gentlewomen. Today, after going through the meta check of healers, it is time now to jump over the tanks. So, unlike the healers, the things we're going to be looking at for tanks is going to be much more Mythic Plus focused, because while it is important for healers to be strong in the raid, it is not nearly as much for tanks, because tanks in raids are being taken more so for the niche special things they have and less because they are a strong tank. It doesn't have as much to do with their power, is what I'm trying to say. What does have to do, on the other hand, a lot with their power is Mythic Plus, which is why, as I said, this is going to be more a video more focused on Mythic Plus and how the tanks are doing. Now, before we start dissecting the tanks and even we start talking about what they can do, they can't do, how they got better, how they got worse, their talents, their legendaries, and whatever else, we have to start with the most important thing, which is the damage. This is a list, a barrage of numbers when it comes to damage for tanks. If you want the TLDR version, if these numbers are too much for you, the lowest damage dealer tank at the moment is Vengeance Demon Hunter. The lowest damage dealing tank at the moment, which is also what we're not really going to be talking about too much in this video because it's going to be a depressing talk, is Protection Warrior. Okay, so once we pretend Protection Warrior doesn't really exist, the lowest damage dealing tank is Vengeance Demon Hunter. After Vengeance Demon Hunter, there is quite the hard fought battle between specs like Brewmaster Monk, Prot, Paladin, and Blood Death Knight. When I say hard fought battle, I mean they can all do a lot of damage. This is a quite even, perhaps the most even and balanced state that tanks have been, even when it comes to doing damage. They all have some quite consistent and quite good damage profiles for Mythic Plus. The only outlier out of all of this is going to be Guardian Druid. Guardian Druid, on average, is still doing more or less the most damage of the other tanks. The difference with the other tanks is that Guardian Druid can benefit even more when you can make big, fat, thick pulls, because they are the tank with the biggest, fattest, thickest amount of cooldowns, and they can abuse this in large pools of enemies. As a demonstration, just look at Theater of Pain. Theater of Pain doesn't have too many big pulls you can do as a tank. And you can see here that specs like Prot Paladin in Theater of Pain are between 10 to 8.9k damage, which is quite low because you can't AoE as much in Theater of Pain. You can look at Blood Decay, which is also somewhat in the same range. And then you look at Guardian Druid, which is also somewhat in the same range. I mean, you can see Guardian is higher, but you don't think it's that much higher. It's still quite balanced between the tanks. And then you switch to a dungeon like Halls of Atonement, where you can make big pulls and you can make constant big pulls one after the other. You can see that Prot Paladin is between 13 to 11,000 DPS. You can see that Blood Death Knight is also slightly higher, but still more or less in the same range. And then you look at Guardian Druid, which is between 16 to 18,000 damage in Halls of Atonement. That is because they can get much more of a benefit in larger pools. So not only do they have the more consistent damage at high level, but also they have the most benefit from making larger pools. That is why at the moment they do have the largest damage output of any tank, really. So, as we can start looking at tank by tank, one after the other, let's just start with what we mentioned being the strongest one when it comes to damage, which is Guardian. So, Guardian, as we said, their damages can be very, very high. What I'm about to show you is going to be quite traumatic for people who enjoy playing the game and having fun, because what you're about to see is how a Guardian Druid does damage in Mythic Plus. Complex rotation, having to maximize buffs and debuffs and good strings of abilities, good timing of cooldowns. No, this is how a Guardian Druid does damage in Mythic Plus. They click on Ravenous Frenzy, they click on Incarnation, and then they spam Thrash. That is over. The lesson is ending. there is no more to say about Guardian Druid. In case you're wondering exactly how it looks, this is an even clearer picture of their damage. The yellow bar is when they activate their cooldowns, and then the following is the damage. The teal color is their tier set bonus Architect's Aligner, and the orange is their trash. That's really all there is to say about Guardian Druid and why they are doing so much damage right now. They can just chain together these cooldowns, of course helped by things like the Relic in this season to have the cooldown gaps even shorter. They are also helped more by their tier set, thanks to giving them Incarnation for a few seconds every time they bark skin. This helps them be more stable when they don't have their combo of cooldowns available, which bridges them in between the cooldown sets, and that's basically how they work. You can gain lots of value with coordinated pulls and big large pulls around their cooldowns. When it comes to diversity, their diversity doesn't really change outside of the way they play. They basically, their biggest choice is in their utility. Do I want a single target stun? Do I want the mass route, perhaps for things like Spiteful? Do I want to go for balance affinity to get something like Typhoon for necrotic weeks, or do I want to go for something like Resto affinity? So it depends, mostly the utility, but their main package of damage and defenses stays the same. Of course, what also stays the same is their set of legendaries. Ursoc's Fury Remembered coupled with their Ventir legendary. Obviously, it goes without saying that so does their Covenant. They are all Ventir to play with Ravenous Frenzy and Sinful Hysteria for their power in their cooldown windows. That's pretty much all there is to say about Guardian Druid. So we can move on to another spec that is doing quite well right now. In fact, the most popular, the most used, even above Guardian Druid, which is Protection Paladin. So Protection Paladin was predicted and expected to be the main star of this tier, mostly because of their damage, because of how we knew their tier set looked powerful, their legendary, their double legendary combination looked powerful, so there was quite some positive, quite some faith being put in the power of Prot Paladin in this tier. When it comes to talent options, they are not really changing their choices from before. Their choice in the last tier was, do I want my defensives to come off cooldown faster, or do I want the bubble-toned cheese to help me with some major large pulls? And then the other one was, do I want better kiting, a stronger consecration with a good slow, or do I want the party healing in that talent row? That's pretty much all the options they had in their talents. When it comes to legendaries, there is not much of an option. This is what we predicted from before we could use two legendaries. So before the Covenant legendaries came out, Prot Paladins were using Bulwark of Righteous Fury for flat out more AoE damage, and then once the Covenant legendaries came out, they were using Divine Toll. Now they can use two together. That's it. They are just using both of them at the same time. That's really not surprising for Protection Paladin. What also makes them strong, obviously, is being Kyrian. This is something we mentioned already for Resto Shaman and Holy Priest in the healer video. Being Kyrian gives you access to the Mechanicos Soulbind, which gives you access to the Effusive Anima Accelerator Soulbind trait, which in the case of Paladin gives them 20-second cooldown of their Divine Toll, which is very, very powerful in Mythic Plus, in AoE situations. So pretty straightforward options for Prot Paladin, not really changing from one tier to the next. They're still Kyrian, their strongest legendaries are still the same, their talent picks are pretty much still the same. They are just doing more of what they were doing before in the first place, really. Now, one spec that did change quite a bit in terms of their damage, but not really in how they play, on the other hand, is Brewmaster. Brewmaster was never known as a tank spec that had tons of damage. Brewmaster was, usually behind Prot Paladin. Before it was also behind significantly Vengeance Demon Hunter. They were never quite the tank you had in mind when you were thinking about tons of damage. However, they have been given a tier set which is incredibly powerful, and luckily for them, gives them also a lot of damage. This is also why, for the first time in what seems like forever, more and more Brewmaster Monks are considering ditching Rushing Jadewind, the soulless, boring, automatic, autopilot ability you click every 6 seconds for some extra AoE into special delivery. So guys, just to give you an idea for this tier, whenever you look at an ability, whenever you look at a legendary, the first thing you have to think about in deciding if it's strong or not is how does this work with the relic? So how much more powerful does this get if I am in Mythic Plus and I am getting relics? Look at Rushing Jadewind, for example. It lasts for 6 seconds and it has a 6-second cooldown, so you can use it all the time. How does this get benefited from the relic cooldown reduction? None at all. It's just the same as before. Now look at Special Delivery. Special Delivery works and procs whenever you use a brew. And it just so happens that all of your brews, your Purifying Brew, your Celestial Brew, even your Fortifying Brew, have their cooldown reduced with the relic. Which means that automatically this talent becomes stronger, because it gets to proc much more, thanks to the CDR you can get. It's also worth mentioning that Brewmaster Monk is getting so much more damage that this talent was already the stronger option when it came to bigger bursts of damage compared to Rushing Jadewind. So this is the main change for Brewmaster Monks from one tier to the next, the more consistent switch towards Special Delivery. When it comes to the other picks, not much is changing because they are still primarily Kyrian. Of course, they pick Call to Arms as a Covenant Legendary, and obviously they are still using Stormstout's Last Keg as their main Covenant Legendary. Obviously, given that their tier set works with Keg Smash, you would be dumb not to use a legendary that gives you 2 charges of Keg Smash and makes it even stronger. And it is also why, of course, their damage it is so Keg Smash centric, obviously. Besides this, the situation is still the same for Brewmaster. They are just much better at doing damage, which is really just what they needed in Mythic Plus, you know? When you look at Brewmaster, they have Ring of Peace, which is great. For Mythic Plus, several affixes from Sanguine to even Spiteful, Raging, Necrotic, anything that can help you kite was great. So they had that. They had Paralysis, which is also great. Being a hybrid, they have access to the spells as a tank, which can also help. So they had plenty of things that were already working before. It's just that what they were missing was their damage. And now they have it. Now it's actually comparable and similar and can be put in the same camp as something like a Prot Paladin. And that's what Prot Paladins were known for, their damage. So it's definitely an improved situation for Brewmaster. Another situation that has improved is for Vengeance. Now you might think you just said Vengeance has the lowest damage. Well, yeah, but they still have improved. You know, Vengeance was looking much more grim and hopeless as we were getting into 9.2, so I don't think they are in as bad of a shape as some were fearing for this patch. They have benefited quite a bit from the relic themselves as well. As you remember, they were playing around Firebrand. They were playing Fiery Soul as a legendary when they could only use one because they wanted their CDR of their Firebrand. They were trying to synergize it, to put more combos together with things like Charred Flesh, things like Burning Alive, and things like Agonizing Flames that constantly, essentially, made you spread your Firebrand. It made your Immolation Aura last longer, which meant a faster CDR of your Firebrand, so your Firebrand uptime was massive, was almost constant. That was the way they were playing. However, many of these things are now not as needed because of the relic and because of the increased CDR you can get. So much predicted from 9.2, they have primarily remained Kyrian because, you know, Elysian Decree is still a very good pick for Vengeance in Mythic Plus together with Blind Faith plus Darkler Boon. This is not only just more damage, because just casting more Fel Devastations is good, but also because Fel Devastation itself is a good defensive ability, and then casting Fel Devastation procs Demonic, which puts you into meta for 6 seconds, so altogether it synergizes really well. What is different is of course that ditching a little bit more the Firebrand build allows them to put back one of their most used talents from before, from old, which is Spirit Bomb. Because Charred Flesh was so key to the Fiery Brand build, right? Getting the CDR off of Fiery Brand was so key, you couldn't use Spirit Bomb. Now, however, there is this thing called the Relic, which gives you CDR. You don't need Char Flesh anymore, which means you gain Spirit Bomb back in your arsenal of abilities. So that is a significant buff to Vengeance Demon Hunter compared to before. Of course, as I said, many other tanks happen to have gotten more and stronger buffs. Guardian, Protection Paladin, Brewmaster, all have gotten pretty stronger buffs as well, so it doesn't look as this is as powerful for Vengeance, but it is. It's just that other tanks are currently doing better. However, we have not finished here talking about tanks that do better because we have left the best for last. That's right, we have left Blood Death Knight for last. Blood Death Knight is far and away the most improved tank from one tier to the next. Now, this didn't happen very organically. This wasn't a slow and progressive growth of item level, of stats, of slow changes over time. These were a series of buffs being given by Blizzard to, I would say first to Death Knight in general, because Unholy and Frost Death Knight also have been buffed over time, but then also specifically buffs for Blood Death Knight. So now Blood Death Knight has gotten to a point where they are basically the second highest damage dealer in Mythic Plus. They are still fighting out, as I said, with Proc Paladin and Brewmaster, but on average they're actually edging it out right now. So these series of buffs come from buffing their tier set multiple times compared to what it was initially. Then they have gotten buffs to their other legendaries like Crimson Rune Weapon being added in the game. Shackle the Unworthy was also significantly buffed compared to before. Shackle the Unworthy previously only had 178% attack power scaling, and then it was buffed to 186. It only reduced the damage you took by 5% instead of 8, and it only had a 50% chance to spread to other targets instead of a 100% chance that it has now. This also works very well with the tier set. The tier set is what is really just skyrocketing BDK when it comes to damage in particular because of their hard strike damage. And of course because of their Dancing Rune Weapon. This is what we have for Blood Death Knight right now in terms of damage. As you can see, it's mostly just activate Dancing Rune Weapon, activate Shackle the Unworthy, and let Hard Strike do the job. That's the majority of their damage coming out right now. Shackle the Unworthy works very well, not just with the ability, but also with the Covenant Legendary, giving you not instant, but quite quick, a quite fast 20% damage increase whenever you pop it. You have Dancing Weapon and the tier set giving you stacking percentage of strength with the Dancing Rune Weapon, so overall this works together very well for Blood Death Knight. The Crimson Rune Weapon legendary they are using now, finally they are ditching my most hated legendary in the game, Super Strain. They can finally use a pretty good legendary like Crimson Rune Weapon together with the Kyrian Covenant legendary. As we said, being Kyrian, it means you must be Mechanicus because of the Anima Accelerator giving you an even further cooldown reduction to your Shackle the Unworthy, which means you get to use it more and more often. So this all together makes their damage in Mythic Plus significantly increased compared to last tier, the previous tier, and pretty much every other expansion. BDK has never had as much damage as they have now in Mythic Plus. This is, for example, a 26-minute plus 23 Mists of Tirna's Seat, where you should be casting on a 2-minute cooldown, you should be casting about 12 to 13 Dancing Rune Weapons, and this Blood Death Knight is casting 24 of them. So almost a 1-minute cooldown to what should be a 2-minute cooldown of the ability. That is what is basically spiking up the damage, the consistent damage of Blood Death Knight. It requires some ramp up of time, yes, but overall it has been a significant improvement compared to last tier. Of course, we can say that part of their changes are going to be going Kyrian now with this change and ditching Super Strain for Crimson Rune Weapon. So overall, they might also be the spec that has changed the most compared to other tank specs. I would say I would put them probably similar to Vengeance Demon Hunter, perhaps a little bit more. Definitely more change than the other specs anyways. So Looking at what we have just looked at, most of these changes are going to be very important for Mythic Plus, but not as much as the raid. We have talked about this at the start of this video, and we will now close the video with it, because as I said, when it comes to raiding, none of this matters too much when it comes to tanks. Generally, you look at the strongest things they can bring. Perhaps it's a Prot Paladin that can give you Ashen Hallow as a Ventir damage dealing tank in a raid encounter. Perhaps it's something like a Brewmaster because of the raid debuff, Vengeance Demon Hunter because of the raid debuff, BDK because they are the most self-sufficient tank that can pump some significant HPS on themselves, basically almost leave the healers alone and not require too much healing, plus the AMZ and the grips that are also helpful. So when it comes to raid meta, is much less about who is the strongest, but rather who has the more and stronger utility picks and utility choices for a raid. That's why it was more important to go and look at the meta when it comes to Mythic Plus, because that is what is going to shape more or less which of the tanks are strong. I feel a little bit bad. I feel a little bit bad for ditching almost completely Protection Warrior, but as I said, there are such few players that when I was looking at all of the other tank specs and their performances in plus 23 keys, I couldn't even look properly at the Protection Warrior specs because there weren't even enough Prot Warriors being listed in plus 23 completed keys. That is the current state of Prot Warrior. Again, some people might be happy with it because of the OP state with their degenerate Thunderclap spam they had for a good portion of BFA. Other people think perhaps their state for the entirety of this expansion basically has been a little bit too rough, not really deserved. So in my case, I am in the latter. I do think they don't deserve this type of weakness in this tier, but at the same time, as I said, the payback of Protection Warrior being so weak is that we are at the most balanced, most even and good spread of tanks that we have ever seen in this game when it comes to meta, when it comes to viable tanks at all levels. So it's very, very good right now for tanks. So enjoy this moment of goodness for tanks, because when we will go over the DPS, we will not be so nice and happy with the state of the meta. There are going to be quite some DPS that are definitely not doing well right now. So for now, I am going to leave you to whatever else you were doing. Thank you guys for watching the video and for helping to support this channel. You can do more by contributing to liking and commenting down on this video, as well as subscribing to the channel. Just like yesterday and the healers video, the subscription button will be open for today for all tank players. Yes, just for today only, I am also considering Protection Warrior to be a tank spec. I am also, once again, on Twitter, and you can also support me on Patreon over here. Your support is very much appreciated. This way I can buy some more honey mixtures for my throat, which gets worse by the day. This being said, thank you guys for watching the video. See you guys soon, and in the meantime, I like it. I like it when I make a video and it gets dark outside over time. It's quite thematic and atmospheric, honestly.